Amy Kurtz, welcome back to the Tick Bootcamp podcast, and welcome to the studio for our YouTube, podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I've been really looking forward to having this follow-up conversation with you, only because you are my favorite interview ever. And now I think it's important for us to follow up on that podcast episode. And to start this, I want you to think back to a couple of weeks ago. We were in Manhattan together, and you arrived to a panel discussion. You were sitting on a panel with several other Lyme stars, and I shared with you that Dr. Horowitz was having dinner by himself down the street. So you followed me down to where Dr. Horowitz was having dinner, and I introduced you to Dr. Horowitz. And I said to Dr. Horowitz, this was my favorite podcast episode ever because Amy is the most healthy, emotionally and spiritually healthy person I've ever interviewed on the podcast. You remember that conversation?
I remember you saying one of.
Oh, and hold on. Amy, I had to interrupt as well because Rich is saying you're his favorite podcast guest ever, but yet he's ignored you for how many emails and inquiries to get back on the podcast, and that's how he treats his favorite guest. I don't want to say we treat other people.
Here's
not lining up.
I've already shared with you that my wife and I are going to adopt you, and if you call your sisters now, the other four, they'll tell you I'm exactly the same way with them as well. So welcome to the family, Amy. I'm just not good communicating on emails and texting, so I apologize. But you are still my favorite, even though I know I'm no longer your favorite. So let's go back to the way I introduced you to Dr. Horowitz, which is you are the most emotionally and spiritually healthy person I've ever interviewed on this podcast.
That's so
and
kind.
What I love about your book, the book that we're going to talk with you about, and we're going to introduce you. We are going to encourage people to listen to your last podcast episode that we did together. But we need this one to stand on its own as well. So we are going to talk a little bit about your background in a briefer format than we did last time. But we are going to do it. But I want to stay with this piece because one of the things that I was looking forward to after the last interview we did together was how you were going to follow up with the second book. Because although you wrote a book on kicking sick, you didn't kick sick, right? You didn't kick sick because you got sick again, right? And because you were not fully healed, and as it turns out, you were not fully emotionally healed. You had a relapse and you went back and you became sick again. And I really wanted to hear that part of your story. I wanted to see how you wrote that book. And I have to tell you, it really met my hopes and expectations. I was looking forward to the book because you did tell me what the title was last time. You did sort of tease about what the topic was going to be, but you really wouldn't go into detail back then. I know you like to be secretive and you want everybody to anticipate.
It has to bake.
Right, all right. So why don't we start the conversation with how your journey with illness could not have been completed, and God needed you to write the second book, and as a result of you needing to write the second book, and as a result of you needing to put that into the world, your illness journey had to be extended.
Well, I wrote Kicking Sick because it was something that I couldn't find anywhere, and I really thought that I had a handle on things, but I didn't realize that my baseline was really off, and that while I thought I was better, I was actually really just treading water. It wasn't that I had all the wrong misdiagnosis, but I didn't know that I had Lyme when I wrote it. And I'm like this picture of glowing health and happiness on the cover, and the truth is that when I went to do the press, that I felt so fortunate to do, and I wanted to go all the way with it and reach as many patients as I could. I would go home and feel like I took off this mask and would just crash and be like, I don't know how I'm going to have the energy to meet this moment the way that I would want to. And then after it was over, and everything in it stands. It was really a love letter from my heart to patients struggling, because at that time, like, the narrative was how to be sick and tired. And I was never going to accept that for myself. So I wrote this book to be an uplifting roadmap for patients to take their health into their own hands and thrive through a really challenging, some would say could be life-defining moment, and make it transformative. But after the book came out, I totally crashed and I realized I don't have a handle on this at all. And that brought up so many feelings for me. Like, I feel like such a fraud. I wrote this book about being healthy and I don't have it together at all. And I'm like barely above water. So I went back to my 36th doctor and he did all the tests. And I brought my Harry Potter anthology of medical records. And I had heard really good things about him. And the ironic thing is, I had almost seen him 10 years before, but I didn't. I decided to go in a different direction. And he did all the tests. He was very grounded. I really felt energetically safe around him. And for so long, I'd been throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick and ignoring my own signals that maybe something wasn't right or speaking up for myself, but I really trusted him, which is really key, especially when you've been struggling for a really long time. And he was like, I'm very clear what you have. You have late-stage neurological Lyme and 2 co-infections. And it was like everything inside of my body knew it was true. I felt so many things all at once. I felt proud of myself for never giving up despite all of the invalidation and gaslighting and the moments where I could have just accepted, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to struggle like this and it's just my path. So I felt proud, but I also felt this deep wave of grief that just kept coming after about how much of my life I had spent fighting for myself, and also relief that I could finally do something about it, because I'm the type of person, like, if you tell me I can get to the other side, I'm going to go and do it immediately. So it was like a really profound moment. And after kicking sick, I really thought, like, maybe I'll have nothing to say, because I always wanted to write another book, but I never felt like I didn't want to offer people who are struggling with their health something that's already been said before. So I made a promise inside myself that I will only write books if it's giving something new to the community that can help them, that's not being repeated. And I really thought, okay, that's it. And then after I went through all of the Lyme treatments and Bartonella and started Babesia, I just had this aha moment that was so much stronger than even the first one, which came to me through a dream. And I said, like, I know exactly what I'm supposed to write now.
Okay, so let's build out your background a little bit, and then we're going to talk about that epiphany that you had and why you were supposed to write this. So you're a Philly gal, right? You grew up outside of Philadelphia in the Lyme Belt. Syracuse University educated. Do you have a master's in fine arts?
BFA.
Okay, and you were an actress. You were actually moved to L.A. at one point, or you were planning to move to L.A.
I was about to, yeah.
And of course you were. I define you as an influencer. Maybe you push me back on that a little bit.
Pushing back. I'm pushing back.
You are certainly an author, a coach, a patient advocate, and we did build this out, and it was episode 449 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. So if folks want to know a lot more about you, they should listen to that episode, because we spent a lot of time on that. So let's get to the book, and let Matt join us. So, what I really appreciated about the approach you were taking in this book, and I guess the most profound moment for me from the standpoint of what triggered this book, and what I was looking for after the first interview, where you did tease that you were writing the second book, and you did share the title with me, was the part of the story where you share that your husband, who had been on this journey with you, said to you, Amy, you are emotionally injured, right? I mean, he's the person that made the observation. And I think you took a really interesting way of describing Danny, who's sort of the guy who was just on the ride, and the guy who's just watching what he's watching, certainly not a trained medical professional in any way, certainly not a mental health professional. And he said to you, you're not well, right? I mean, you need to now take the second step. And that, the way you described it in the book was a moment where you were like, wow, my healing has just started, right? Like,
yeah, well, it was just shocking to me, because I'm the type of I did so much work on myself. I was in talk therapy the whole time. I've always been a seeker. So it kind of surprised me when we were on what I call the worst date ever, when he took me out to dinner and he said, I have something provocative to say to you. And I'm like, oh boy, okay. buckling up, what is it? And he's like, who says that on a date? And he said, I always knew that there was going to be a second phase of this for you because what you've been through is so traumatic and it's impossible not to have like an aftermath to this. And I was like, what? And he said, then I said, he's like, it's like you're waiting for the second shoe to drop. And I'm like, shoe? What is he talking about? And then I just started going through my head and it felt like a thud. I say in the book, it landed like a croc, like a camouflage croc, not a cute shoe, right in the middle of the table. And nothing against Crocs. And it made me start to go internally thinking like, okay, but wait, I've been working on myself the whole time. But the truth is I was experiencing something inside of myself that I couldn't find language for. And so it was new to me that this guy with no medical training was the first person to point out that there might be a second phase. And I was like, oh yeah, wait, it's like I blinked and I went from 25 to 40. And I don't know where that part of my life went. I mean, I was living, but I was really running. And it wasn't until I was physically better and a lot better that everything else that I had shelved away over the years came up for the taking because there was capacity. And that's very common in any kind of capital T trauma where something happens that is so intense and that you don't have capacity to deal with, so you shelve it, and it's almost like it gets locked in a chest outside of you until you have the capacity to process it. So it was actually my brain protecting me in a way because it would have been way too much all at once. But once I was finally settled inside myself, I couldn't figure out why I felt so incredibly anxious. I was obsessive. I felt so hypervigilant, so afraid that I would just go right back to where I was before. Like there wasn't any part of me that felt safe inside myself. And it was a version of me that I didn't recognize, but I couldn't find what it was because nobody had written anything about it.
Amy, you are quoted in the book as saying, I survived the illness, but I didn't feel emotionally safe. You went on to say that the trauma persisted beyond the physical pain as well. And you coined the term, and I think you're getting to that term. Can you share with everybody that's listening right now what the term you coined is? Because for me, when I read that, it just was like a mind-blown reaction. So,
oh, wow. I made it up myself. I was trying to figure out, why am I so tense? Why can't I just fucking relax? Like I couldn't calm down. And then I went, holy shit, I have medical trauma brain. And then I was like, wait, what is medical trauma brain? So that's what the book is about, is like I diagnosed myself for something that I learned that I had. And then I started to interview physicians, and I would say to them, really trusted physicians, I would say, do you ever see this sort of aftermath where patients are better, but they're not better? It's almost like a PTSD, but it's not, because PTSD is one incidence. And they would all go, oh yeah, now that you mention it, like, yes, actually, it is that patient that they're better, but they're not acting as if they're better. And then I started to go, oh, wow, okay, if I've interviewed all of these people, now I'm going to go to the patients. So I interviewed over 1,000 patients, some of which are in the book, and everyone had this like deep exhale of like, oh my God, this is exactly how I feel. And I didn't even know that it was running my life in this way. So it's called MTB, or medical trauma brain. And the more that I say it, the more I kind of like it, because it's pretty obvious once you think about it.
Yeah. And you also talk about the chronic resilience culture as well in your book, and how that's related to your medical trauma brain. So can you talk to us about what that term means and why you want to do a deep dive with it to really unravel your healing as well?
Well, I love this question because resilience is really needed when we're battling something inside of ourselves. Like, it requires all of you to fight against it and for your well-being. And I've always been someone that's very tenacious and very resilient. But what happens is when you have to be resilient all the time. For me, it was decades. For other people, it might be short term. It doesn't matter. When it turns into you're chronically being resilient and you're ignoring everything else that's happening just to get to the other side, it can actually be really, really detrimental for you because you can't stop being resilient and being almost like a watchdog in some ways, like waiting for something to happen. Your brain rewires and you can't undo it unless you have tools. But I think that there's this misconception in society where we're like, just be resilient, just push through, just get to the other side, get back on the horse, you're well now. Or like you're either sick or you're well and there's nothing in between. But it creates, there's no horse. The horse left. The cruise ship left. Nothing is the same as where you left it. And while you were in that mode of being on this hamster wheel and running and running and running, everything changed.
Well, everything does change, Amy. And I think one of the challenges that, I've talked with you about in the past and I've talked with many other podcast guests about is that the Western medical system is really just designed to focus on acute care for the physical illness that somebody has suffered. They're not trained, and they're not even offering any analysis of what impact the physical injury is having on your brain, on your emotions, and they're certainly not trained, nor do they consider the impact that it's having on your spirit. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about the way you described this process of healing and being resilient when you're going through the physical phase of your illness, and I think you need to be. I don't think you're going to get better physically if you're not resilient, if you're not grinding through all the challenges that come along with so many of the therapies that you necessarily have to utilize to get better. But that is going to rewire your brain. I mean, it's necessarily going to happen. And where the system is failing is they're not suggesting to you either before you start this process or even when you get through the process of dealing with the physical injury that it's now time to work on the brain. And that's one of the things that I think is great about the way you've sort of captured. I would argue God sent that to you rather than you making it up, but we can debate about that as well. But when you finally had a way of characterizing that and you came up with the term that you're using, and we're now going to use regularly in this community, I promise you I will footnote you, is that there is, I think, a multi-step process. I think you have to heal physically and recognize that your brain is going to rewire in a way that will serve you while you're going through the traumatic experience of physically healing. But then you have to go through the process of now changing the wiring in your brain because it's not going to serve you any longer when you're no longer physically ill, when you're now moving forward in your healing journey. And in some cases, there are going to be people that are going to be spiritually injured as well. And
yeah, well, I think, there's this we're in two things. We're in a culture that says to just push through everything and move forward and move on. And that's how we value success, is just go, 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 do. But that's so wired in us from when we're so young. It's just part of the American culture. And then for me, it was like I was physically better, but my mind hadn't gotten the memo. My mind was still running on this hamster wheel of fear. And it's a place that I call the Shadowlands, which that's how MTB feels to me, which is I was better and I was out with my friends and I was having a good time and I was laughing, and there are people that I love so much. But there was another part of me that was like locked away in a sandstorm desert all alone. And the real key is that our medical system is life-saving and it is designed to treat acute illnesses, and it does so very well. However, we now have 194 million Americans that have chronic disease in this country. That's an epidemic, and that means if you don't have it, someone next to you does, at least one. So the system hasn't caught up. The system evaluates one part of the body at a time. And that's why so many Lyme patients end up with a functional medicine doctor, because there are so many parts of you that are intertwined. And so for patients like me who had been struggling and looked fine, I felt like I was lost in this, like the land of the lost. Like I was in this gray abyss that if I wasn't so resilient, I would never escape from. And that was one of the things that felt like, as I look back, like, but I had to be that way.
You did have to be that way, Amy, because when we're sick, we're more vulnerable, right? It's harder for us to protect ourselves, even to define threats when we're physically sick. So as a result of being physically sick and more vulnerable and not having the same capacity to protect ourselves, our survival software is going to be more vigilant. It is going to be looking for more threats because it has to alert us sooner, and we have to be able to take steps to protect ourselves in the event that we find ourselves in a dangerous situation. So it makes sense that that's how our brain would react, and it makes sense that it would be hypervigilant. Unfortunately, the hypervigilance ultimately becomes a second level of illness when we get through the physical element of the disease.
Well, that's why I called it medical trauma brain, because it's not post-traumatic stress. That's when one incredibly scary or traumatic incident happens. Complex post-traumatic stress is when the incident happens over and over and over again. And this isn't either of those because the threat is your body. You literally don't trust your body anymore.
Well, the reason I like the term in the context of working with people in the Lyme community is because of what triggers the illness, right? So post-traumatic stress in most cases is some kind of a violent event that you're a part of. Most people don't realize that Lyme disease is a traumatic experience, and most people don't realize that medical trauma is different than violence-related trauma. Or somebody's in the military, they're participating in maybe a series of violent experiences or witnessing a series of violent experiences, and they come back with PTSD. That's very different from a causation standpoint than the medical process causing the injury. So even if the injury, even if it were the same, even if the system were the same, it's a different cause, and it helps people who are going through this to have language to understand how this is a traumatic experience and what impact it's going to have on their brain, and how the changes in their brain are going to cause them to have their brain serving them at one point and then betraying them later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to build on that, Amy, because the medical trauma brain theory makes me think about how the brain itself can look different in a scan. So a PET scan, we've seen this through the Amy Clinic, for example. And we've heard this from other guests, and we both have a mutual friend in Jesse Rubin, the artist. And he shared a very similar experience where he was better physically, but emotionally and from the trauma and the brain pathways, they were stuck. He was in that state where he was constantly feeling unsafe. He went and had to do a variety of things as well. And we had this conversation with him just last week at the Lyme Warrior Gala in Connecticut, and it was mind-blowing to hear a very similar experience. So can you speak to the research you did in preparation of this book, and what kind of specific information you learned about the brain, how its activity changes, how its pathways change, and how you have to now, it's a real pathway problem in the brain that has to be undone to help you feel safe again after the physical bacteria is gone from your body?
Yeah, so I dove in pretty deeply. I wanted the first part of the book to be convincing patients, not just Lyme patients, but patients that have struggled with chronic disease, that this is something that they too have, because I don't feel like you can ever be free if you don't do this part of the healing, because it will always be like a ghost that follows you. So then I dove really intensely into the research, and I interviewed world-renowned trauma experts like Dr. Peter Levine, Dr. Gabor Mate, Irene Lyon, grief specialists, and I started to understand that after a traumatic event, whether it be MTB or any other kind of trauma, that your brain literally changes. It changes because it's always sensing or scanning for threat. And what I learned from speaking to both of them, which I felt so grateful that they said yes to do this, because not only did it help me in talking to them, but I know how many patients it will help, that it's literally impossible to talk your way through something. It can't be done unless you address the nervous system.
Yeah, that brings me to, I had so many notes as you were talking earlier, Amy. So one of the things I wrote down was talk therapy versus somatic therapy. And you touch on this as well in the book. And I think it's an important distinguishment between how talk therapy is one approach, but then actually touching the physical body and helping the emotional state is different. So can you explain the difference and then give us some examples that you use in your journey and you talk about in your book on the somatic side?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was a really long road for me, and I dabbled in like most things because I realized along the way that there was no one size fits all, that I had to address it from multiple angles. And my hope is that the reader will actually not do what I did, but try to get in the driver's seat and figure out what works for them. So I tried to put it all in one place so that they can make their own toolbox, because that's part of healing, is that you need agency. If you don't have it, you will never be empowered. And
more notes coming for later.
so for me, I had been in talk therapy since my 20s, and I was with a good therapist, and I thought the whole time, like, I'm working through this. And then when Danny said that to me, I was like, wait, what? Like, I don't get it. I really invested in myself. How could I not have seen this? How could I not have gotten it? And then I started to do CBT because, like I said, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, because I was having extreme anxiety. I was having debilitating episodes of fear, and I was unable to help myself. I was having panic attacks and just like so tense all the time. And this was all new because it was the first time that I could actually feel it. It was underneath everything the whole time, but the physical ailment overtook it. So I started to do cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really very helpful with anxiety. It gave me tools. It gave me empowerment, that there were things that I could do to talk to my mind or talk my mind through things to de-escalate the stress scale. Because for me, and I'm sure that people will resonate with this watching, but it was like I'd get stressed and I'd go to an 11. There was no scale. I just would jump to the top and be like bracing for impact. And while it helped me, there were certain things that just scared me too much, that I couldn't push through, that I couldn't, no matter how I talked to myself or evaluated the situation. And I have so many amazing tools from that I use to this day, all the time, like maybe every day. But it just took me to a place where I was like, wait, there's a missing component to this. I don't know what it is. Then I started to look into EMDR, and I added that in conjunction with CBT. And that's when I started to have a real shift, because your brain can only talk you through so much when you're traumatized. But EMDR, which is so incredible, literally takes you out of your logical brain.
Amy, can you just describe that? That's eye movement desensitization, I think, something. I forget what it stands for. But can you describe what that therapy is from a practical standpoint and how it helps?
So it's a trauma therapy, and it works for big T traumas or little T traumas or any disturbing memories that you have. I interviewed Dr. Barry Herbach, and he shares in it that not only did he resonate from a patient perspective because he had Lyme, but he also had worked with so many people. I'm just going to give you this example because I think it's you can understand it easily. So there was a soldier that came back from Afghanistan, and he would go to sleep every night next to his wife with a flashlight and a gun. Every night. And his wife was like, you gotta figure this out because there's no threat here. But it was like if he even heard an onset or a sound or the dog barked, he was up with the gun and the flashlight, like immediately ready for battle. And this really resonated with me because while it's a totally different experience, that immediate reaction to defend or control or try to like help yourself quickly, it's like this switch goes off in your brain and you can't control it. And it was through EMDR that the therapist was able to take him out of his logical brain and get into his emotional brain, which is, he said that he felt such a rush of adrenaline when he was in battle that he actually almost missed it in some weird way. And after they talked through it, he's never slept with a flashlight or used a gun ever again.
Wow.
Okay.
But it can literally take you to places that you could start with one disturbing memory and it could take you on this wild ride of things that you totally forgot about. But the point of it is that your logical brain can't outdo it.
So let's talk about this. So the conscious versus the subconscious, right? And the conscious brain can rewire the subconscious brain if using the right tools, right? Because one of the things that I want to be careful about as we're having this conversation is, first of all, we do this podcast because we want to bring models to the community so that people can see what is possible for them, right? And I described you as the most spiritually and emotionally healthy person I ever interviewed. And the reason I want you to be back is because I want you, not just because I like you, and I do, but I also want you to be someone to model. I want people to see you as someone that they can model so that they can have a similar level of success, where they can be spiritually healthy, they can be emotionally healthy, and they can be physically healthy, right? So one of the things that I really like about Tony Robbins, he argues that any form of human excellence will leave clues. And what you should be doing is looking for the clues that are left behind so that you can model that and you can ultimately achieve that same level of human excellence. And I do consider you a form of human excellence, which is why I want people to pay attention to this.
Thank you, Rich.
So, well, you're welcome. So the one of the things that you describe really well in the book is that every single Lyme patient, and we're a Lyme podcast, so I know you have a bigger mission than we have here, but every single Lyme patient has a different presentation. And the reason every single person has a different presentation is they come to the experience in a very different way. One element of that experience is they're going to have a different set of bugs in them than the next person. And it's not just the bugs, but it's the strain of the bugs and how long the bugs have been in their body, so and how those bugs have changed based on the species of tick that it was in. So you're going to have a very, very diverse set of permutations just with the bugs alone, right? Then the second issue that we have is, of course, it's really a terrain disease, right? And everyone is going to have a very different terrain. And we spend a lot of time focusing on genetic differences and genetic SNPs, which is something Matt and I debate about all the time. I don't think there's a lot of diversity in our genetics, quite frankly. But I know there's a great deal of diversity within our biome, right? I mean, we have very, very different terrains, every single human being. So when you put together all those different permutations between the types of bugs that are in your body, between the diversity in the terrain, you're never going to have any two people that are going to be the same, right? So we're never going to have the same path that's going to allow someone to be successful, meaning I took this test and I used this drug, and it's just never going to work. What will work, however, is the model that someone like you used to get better, right? That trial and error approach that you had taken to get better physically, and the trial and error approach that you took to get better emotionally. Because even though no one of the treatments that we talked about during our first podcast interview together allowed you to get better, you got a little better each time, and they sort of built on one another, and you finally got to a place where you were healthy physically, and that's why you wrote the first book that you had written, and it was a wonderful model for that piece of it. But now we have a second level of illness, and the next level of illness, which is created by the medical trauma, also has to be one that you have to overcome. And you did the same thing. It was trial and error with a number of different type of therapeutic interventions, and the totality of all of that ultimately got you to the place where you were healthy. But the reason you became so healthy emotionally is because you did rewire your brain. I think that's an important part that I want to focus on, because as you and Matt were talking about the different therapies, what I was concerned about was that there was, at least what was lost for me, was the goal is to rewire your brain. And it can be rewired, and what I'd like you to do is focus on these different therapies that you did utilize and what role each one of them played in rewiring your brain, so that you are not now hypervigilant. You are not the person with the gun and the flashlight next to Danny. Now your brain was now serving you in a way that was healthy rather than unhealthy.
Well, okay, two things. I want to say that the body is, in this Western medical landscape, the body is considered separate from the mind and the spirit and the emotional self, and there's no separating them. And that's detrimental to a patient, to say you just have to treat this physically and then you're good. But it's literally impossible, and I think we're one of the only countries that look at the body that way, as if we're separate parts and pieces, when mind, body, and spirit are one. There is no separating them, no matter what anyone says. And it's impossible that you won't be affected in another way if you're affected in one. So I wanted to say that first, because I think it's really important, and it's something that that's not really talked about. But it was really important for me to understand what brain-body therapy is and what body-brain therapy is. And it wasn't until I brought in and learned from Dr. Peter Levine and Dr. Gabor Mate that we feel as patients, I'm saying we because I think this will feel like a general resonance, is that your body is almost like a separate entity or a threat, like that you can't fully trust, because part of the experience of being sick for so long is you may start out trusting yourself, but the experience of being a perpetual patient, at least for me, made me question my instincts and not trust myself. And true healing really begins when you start to listen to your body's cues on a very simple basis. Because for so long, we've been like, well, this body is not working, so I have to do all of this other stuff to help it. But true healing comes when you actually get to know your body again and you listen to its basic signals. I mean, you knew enough to go to a doctor. You knew that. You did that. And you got through the hardest part, which was the horrible fight and the amazing amount of resilience it takes to get yourself physically well. But I argue that this other half is essential if you're ever going to feel free from the experience that you've been through. So it was really understanding that there are so many different things that we can do to help ourselves, and there just wasn't any place that put it all together.
Okay, so let's pause there, because you've captured the essence of my concern, which is the goal is to rewire your brain, correct? Mm-hmm. And there are various ways that you can rewire your brain. Some of the therapies that you use allow you to rewire your brain with your conscious brain rewiring your subconscious brain, right? Some of the therapies you were using, your body was rewiring the brain. So can you tease out the different therapeutic tools that you used and how each of them were designed with the same goal, but had the different function of, and I'm going to call it thirds. I think it's the body, the emotions, and the spirit. How the different therapies either used your conscious mind to rewire or to start to rewire your subconscious brain, or how your body was used to rewire. Because both can work; they're just different approaches to the same combination of these thirds.
Mm-hmm. So CBT was life-changing for me because it gave me agency over myself when I would feel anxious. It taught me that I can do things to help myself, that I don't have to feel so bad in a whole new way, and that I can handle it, whatever it is. Because somewhere along the way, I don't know if you experienced this too, like I just felt like, well, I can't handle it, is the subconscious message that was happening, and I didn't even get that memo. But CBT gave me all of these tools, like, for instance, there's a SUD scale where you can start to identify where you are on a stress spike, and then there are ways that you can try to slow down the stress spike, which for me means, like, I stop, drop, and roll. If I go fast, I put my phone away, I get outside, and I wait an hour, because really almost anything can wait an hour, unless it's a true emergency. Then she taught me other things you could say, like, will this matter in 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years? Will I be so upset about this or scared? And also, she gave me ways that you can talk back to your brain and challenge its worst fears. Because for me, I would go fear looping and I'd go to worst case scenario and I wouldn't be able to talk myself out of it. And she taught me how to talk back to myself. And that was really, really so helpful.
Amy, can you give some examples of how to talk back to yourself?
Well, I call it the maybes in the book. I don't think that my therapist would call it that, but if I thought, oh my God, I have a joint flare, it's going to be as bad as it was before, and it's all going to come back, I would be able to say, maybe it won't be as bad as I thought. Maybe it won't be as bad. And I'd literally say it out loud. Like, I would make myself laugh because I'd start to identify what these fears were and be like, okay, we're not, this is not reality.
But Amy, so stop there for a second because that's perfect. Because what's happening is your brain had a neural pathway that was causing you to believe that it was going to be that bad, and then you stopped and you said, it's not going to be that bad,
Yeah.
right? And what you did is you now showed your brain that that pathway was wrong, and now that pathway now begins to dissipate because you challenged that. And that's how we use our conscious brain to now rewire our subconscious brain.
Yeah.
And now these anxieties, which, one of the things that's, I think, really important for our listeners and our viewers now on YouTube to understand is that fear and anxiety feel exactly the same. They're very different because fear is a response to a clear and present danger. If I jump up with a knife and I try to stab you, yes, that's fear, right? But
Please don't.
I would never do that. But that's fear. And the way your body would react and how you would feel and your heart racing and that's anxiety feels exactly the same way, even though it's what anxiety is you are imagining a threat. Your brain is triggering to tell you there's a threat when there is not, in fact, a threat, right? And that's because your brain was wired to constantly be in this hypervigilance mode, and now you were anxious all the time, and
trying to be preventative against the anxiety, like trying
Which
to
made you more
control
anxious,
things so that I would be safe, which
Right.
that didn't work.
but you really were safe, but your brain was telling you weren't safe, and that's the
And
important
if
thing for
I
us.
wasn't safe, I could handle it. But my brain was positive that I couldn't because it didn't trust my body.
So let's talk about cognitive behavioral psychology, because it's one of the things we spend a lot of time exploring here at Tick Boot Camp, where the Maxwell Maltz identified the psychocybernetic loop, where it's beliefs trigger your thoughts, thoughts trigger your feelings, feelings trigger your actions, actions give you results, results now reinforce your beliefs. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is Matt and I were both excited to talk to you about agency in particular. And
My favorite thing to talk about.
and where agency begins and ends. And I do want to shout out to my niece who just graduated from George Washington University with a PhD.
Congratulations.
Because my niece Blakely Murphy, the brilliant young doctor, and I had a huge several-hour debate about agency. And when I read the book and saw how you were defining agency and the doctor who wrote the foreword defined agency, we were excited to have that conversation, right? So in the spirit of agency and now understanding how your brain works, what the process is, where does the agency from the standpoint of healing yourself emotionally begin? How are you defining agency first, and where does it begin in the emotional healing element of this journey?
I don't think, in my opinion, that any person who has struggled tremendously with chronic or acute illness will ever fully get better unless they have agency over their health and their well-being. And we live in a society where so many people are sick, and also when we're young, we're taught to defer to people in power, and doctor knows best. And something happens through those years where at least for me in the beginning, I was like, can you just take this and handle it for me because it's too much? And then I would start to throw spaghetti at the wall, or I would stop listening to myself. Like I'd get pricked 5 times and wish in my head thinking I should switch nurses, but I wouldn't do it because I didn't feel that I had the liberty to do that, or that would be okay, because what I really needed to do was get better. And so I would find myself dismissing my intuition over the years, over and over and over again. And so many bad experiences happened that I really totally lost trust in myself and what my body was telling me. That's why somatic experiencing and other body therapies really worked for me. But when I met my current doctor, it was uncomfortable at first because he made me meet him in the middle. And I was so used to for decades, deferring to what the doctor thought. And once he diagnosed me, which like that would have been enough, I would have loved him forever for that. He said, I'm going to give you the treatments. I'm going to tell you what to expect. I'll be here along the way, but ultimately the pace is up to you. And I'm like, what? Like, what does he mean? I felt like this little kid. I talk about it in the book, but I felt like I was in rain boots, like a little kid where you're not supposed to jump in the puddle. And I was like looking at him like, seriously, I can like jump? Okay. So I did. And it was really uncomfortable to be like, okay, well then I guess it's up to me. And it made me learn about my body in a totally different way than I had ever experienced before, because I learned its limits. I learned what worked, what didn't work, what I needed to do to help it get through the treatments, what detox therapies helped me. And it literally completely changed my relationship with myself, because I started to trust myself again and know that he trusted me. Like he would say, how do you feel about this? Or what do you think's going on? And that had been the first time in 36 physicians that someone had ever asked me that. So for me, I started to realize even before I was putting the book together, like I think that this is one of the main messages, that unless you step into it, no one knows your body better than you. Nobody cares more about you getting better. And the only way out is through. So if you don't have your own back and not settle for bad care or let people get away with things or just let someone else take the wheel, you will never get to the other side. Do you agree?
100%. So I'm going to push you a little bit more on this, Amy. So if I had to ask you, what is a definition of agency?
I don't know why I laugh every time you say that. I'm going to just push you a little more here.
Because it's such a...
That's very polite.
Because it's such
like,
an interesting concept, and like everything you said, I completely agree with. But I think there's two extremes depending on how we define the word agency. So can you, in a concise way, in a few sentences, define agency for us?
Having agency means being in control of your life and making your own decisions based on your intuition, your feelings, trusting your body, not accepting bad care or invalidating experiences, and trusting yourself that you have the ability to get through the other side.
And I couldn't agree more with that
Brilliant.
definition. Yes. So I have no argument because of how you defined it, because I didn't know if I was going to have a debate or not with you. So
Are we debating?
we're not debating
Okay.
because I agree completely. So, but I think
I'll jump in a
Debates make
debate.
me nervous.
But I just want to tell you, Amy, that the reason I asked that was initially when I first started reading your book, and I pivoted away from that view based on getting through the rest of it, but then also think about how other people react in the Lyme community. And there's that attitude out there that you have to take control and you have to do it on your own. And you don't need a doctor, you can be your own doctor. And I think that becomes hard for people. And that's why when people use that term agency out in the community, not you, because I agree with your definition,
Yeah.
others, I think it can be harmful. So your definition is, I think, very sound and very logical and wise. But I think there's a time where we have to trust doctors to guide us, but we trust our own instinct as well and work in parallel.
Can I get in here?
Please,
Okay.
yeah.
So I believe that the doctor-patient relationship has to be 50-50. And we are taught as a society to give them 100%. But when you've struggled with Lyme for as long as we have, or you've struggled with other kinds of illness, if you really want to get better, you've got to like step into it, because it's a partnership. And when I say agency, I don't mean figure it out all yourself. I would never ever be the way that I was, and I even say it at the end of the book in the acknowledgments. Like my doctor, Leo Galland, he
Shout
saved
out.
my life. I mean, he saved my life, but not only did he help me get physically better, he made me be a part of it. And that is why I'm better.
One more thing, I know Rich wants to jump in, because you said something earlier and I wrote it down. You said when you start this journey, you trust yourself. But when you end this journey, the physical healing, you don't trust yourself. And I think having agency in the second half of the healing journey you're outlining helps you regain confidence in yourself. It helps reset the brain. It helps with the brain rewiring Rich was describing.
Yeah.
So I think that term you defined is critical to help reestablish that trust in yourself, that intuition, and that ability to have your brain heal from the traumatic experience. And Rich, I'll let you debate now, because I know you do.
So many things to say.
Amy doesn't like debate, so I'll say stress test.
I don't know. It makes me nervous.
Let's stress test. But I appreciate you defining agency, and it really was a brilliant definition. Meaning, we are in control of the tools we need to get better physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Would you accept my re-description of your?
Accepted.
Okay, thank you. So now the question is with the emotional piece is, where do we have control and where don't we have control? Where do we have agency and where don't we have agency? And this is, again, I'm now stress testing this conversation with you, following my stress testing this with my niece a week ago, which is which portions of our emotions are we conscious of and therefore control, and which portions of our emotions are we not conscious of and we therefore are not controlling but can gain control over? Because that's really the heart of, I think, what I loved about your book, where you were defining those pieces of our conscious brain that we can control, recognizing that using whether it be cognitive behavioral psychological therapy, which I think is the best, but other types of therapy such as somatic therapy, where you are not in control. You have, in my view, you have no agency over the subconscious portions of your brain, and where your agency begins is where you learn how the process works, how to understand that your feelings are a response to your thoughts, and your thoughts are automatically a response to your beliefs. And what you have to do is you have to rewire your belief system, and that's where the agency begins. Give me your response to my stress testing that and my interpretation of the way you were teaching it in the book.
Well, I just know from my own experience that you can't ever fully get better unless you regulate your nervous system. And the nervous system and the brain are directly connected. So the second part of the therapies that I explained in the book are called body-brain therapies because they work with the nervous system. So, for example, Dr. Peter Levine shared just these simple exercises where you might feel a fear. And I explained to him that for me, it felt like a wildfire stress response where I would just get so scared so fast. And he said, yes, that is what it feels like when you feel dysregulated. It feels like an out of control burning fire. And he said, but if you can stop and get into your body and do somatic experiencing, which he shares in the book, you can start to identify what is my body so upset about. And by doing these two things together, you link the two, because you start to create this infinity loop where one works with the other. But the brain, for me, I always went to intellectualizing things. Like I'd be like, well, I'm going to figure it out or whatever it was. And I would go to my brain. But at that point in my healing, my body was like disconnected from my brain. So it wasn't until I started to really start to listen to my body's basic signals, which I wasn't listening to for so long. I think so many people struggle with this, that your body is like betraying you. So you figure or at least for me, like I'll just do it all.
Separate.
Yeah. And it wasn't until I started to create a synergy between the two and really commit to doing that work with myself that I no longer felt like I was in the Shadowlands.
So let's come back to the psychocybernetic loop, or the foundation of cognitive behavioral psychology. And I think what good therapists do is they don't only force us to take control of or to acknowledge our own agency. What they also do is they teach us about how the human operating system works, right? And the human operating system works the same for everyone, and we can use the same operating system from the front or the back to ultimately rewire our brain. But we're not in control of how our brain is wired. We are not in control of that. We are in control of working with showing our brain how it's not wired properly, but from an agency standpoint, how our brain was wired beyond our control. During the first 7 years of our life, our brain is being wired, and we're not even aware of it. between the ages of 7 and 14, our brain is being wired, and we're somewhat aware of it, but we can't even control it. And it isn't until we turn 14, and in that window between 14 and 25, where we begin to play a role in what we believe and what we don't believe. We make decisions about that, which is starting to wire our brain. So, one of the places, again, where we are so different, every one of us, which is why we have a different emotional presentation, is every one of us had different experiences during the first 25 years of our lives. And because of that, we all have a very, very different emotional terrain because of all the wiring that's happening. And now, what's happening after the belief portion of it is our thoughts are automatic, and we think our thoughts are us because we hear our own
believe
voice,
them.
but we believe them, but they're not us. They're not our thoughts. I mean, it's not us, and it's software, right? And then the feelings are just going to be a manifestation of those automatic thoughts that, again, coming from our wiring, right? And then our actions are going to be a response to the feelings that were the manifestation of our thoughts that are the portion of the brain that's been wired into us, right? And that then reinforces those beliefs. And if they're not serving us now, even though they served us at the time that we were sick, the loop is going to continue, and we're not going to be well. And what you've done so brilliantly in the book is you've showed different therapeutic methods of either using physical tools to rewire your brain, right? And that's one way of doing it, or going back through the loop and saying, okay, and David Barrett teaches this really well. You feel really badly, and the reason you're feeling badly is because your onboard diagnostic system is telling you that the belief is wrong. And you walk it back, which you gave the example of with Matt, and you now ask yourself, what did I have to think in order to be able to feel this way? And then you walk back and you ask your brain, what did I have to believe in order to be able to have that thought triggered? And now you show your brain that it's not true. And that's how you're rewiring it backward. But you can rewire it forward as well, where you can start to make changes physically. And when you're making the physical changes, that will change your brain as well. I mean, there are a million different examples of that. But one of the things that, that I found to be really powerful when I was doing some of this work was, even when you feel miserable, if you smile, it changes the way you feel, right? I mean, you're that physical brain connection, and that's just one example. Of course, not going to change your brain change the traumatic pathways, but it's certainly going to change the way you feel and then allow you to control the brain better. So from my perspective is that your agency is in the place where you need to find therapeutic protocols that will allow you to change the beliefs so that your belief system will serve you, and remove those beliefs that are no longer serving you.
Yes, and learn to trust your body again. That starts as simply as, how often do we ignore the urge to pee or not drink water when we're thirsty because we're like, oh, well, I got to do this and I'll just hold it, or I just won't do this, or I'll just push through the whole day and I'll eat dinner later even though I'm starving and it's 11 o'clock. I mean, people do that all the time because we live in a society that praises forward movement and success and continually going. I mean, it's literally thought of as weak to restore. And so I just lost my thought.
No, and Amy, I think a lot about this as well, because I think it's part of the socialization process, and why we're socialized that way is something that that we can stress test as well. But one of the first times I really started to think about this is years ago. I read the Abs Diet book by David Zinczenko, and one of the things that David Zinczenko argued was that the reason we eat such large portions in the U.S., even when you have a companion restaurant in Europe, same restaurant chain, one in Europe, one in Philadelphia, he had given the example, and the portions were very different. And he argued that what you have to do is you have to listen to your body, and as soon as you finish eating, I mean, as soon as you're satiated, you're supposed to stop eating. And he said, be aware of how everybody else at the table is going to respond to you, and be aware of how the wait staff is going to respond to you. Even though the waiter may have been trained in Europe, and even though they may have had very different portions there, the waiter is going to socially pressure you to finish the food. Is there something wrong? Do I need to bring you something else? Why didn't you finish it? And he said, what's happened is we've been socialized away from ignoring the feeling of satiation, and as a result, we're all getting fat. right? Or we're getting fat and then taking the shot and not being fat anymore, but whatever it happens to be, is because we're not listening to our body. And that's just one small example that I started thinking about, and then I just started looking at throughout my life, and it's happening everywhere. Like, we're constantly being told not to listen to our body, but that we should offload, our agency to other people. And doctors are another perfect example in the context that we have here, right? Some of it is just cultural, right? Your culture of coming from a long line of doctors is one culture where you were trained to offload your health to doctors. My culture was different. I don't come from an educated culture. I don't come from a line of doctors. I come from immigrants who came here and praised and worshiped doctors. So they have the highest status in our society, and of course you're going to listen to them because that's the way we were socialized, right? So we find this in a lot of different contexts. As simple as the food we're eating and when we're satisfied, when we go to the bathroom, when we don't go to the bathroom, when we do eat, when we are allowing ourselves to explain to a doctor how we feel. I mean, it happens all over, and every one of us comes with a different emotional terrain to this experience.
Yeah. But I think even though we grew up differently, like my grandparents were immigrants, and I learned the same thing. I think a lot of people in our culture.
But they were doctors, right?
Some of them.
Yeah.
But
we didn't have any doctors.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just again, to share with you, we all did become doctors. Well, that's the other part of this, right? Because there was so much status. My mother's saying is, we make doctors and lawyers, right? Because she came from a culture where that was the status, right? So, and we all became doctors and lawyers. So you're being trained not to listen to you and your body and your emotions and your spirit. You're trained to offload that, and that's that agency piece that we really have to emphasize. And in the emotional piece of this, again, to go back to the model conversation we were having, what I really liked about what you did was you knew you had a problem. Again, I give Danny a lot of credit for that, for observing that you had a problem, right? And after you got over the grief of recognizing that you had another problem, even though and that's going to trigger the grief, right? That you thought you were done, and for you it was even more painful because you were I won't call you an influencer, but you were certainly an influential person in that space, and having written a book and had gotten a lot of media attention, and now you're like, holy cow, was I a fraud? And that's going to trigger grief, right? I mean, you have to go through that grief cycle, and then after you got through the grief cycle, something new came out of that, and that's the only way we get out of grief, right? Something new, and the something new is that you now wanted to serve people by, going on this journey yourself of healing emotionally, and the steps you took and the trial and error that you had taken to get you through that, and then ultimately writing the book.
Yeah. It wasn't until I had addressed the mind-body connection that I actually felt the grief.
Okay.
Because I felt like I was frozen, and it wasn't until I rewired my brain that I actually allowed myself to process all of the years of my life that I had lost. But it's not just that. It's that when we're young, we see our life going a certain way. Like from age 5, I'm like, I'm an actor. That's it. I had a clear path. I knew exactly who and what I wanted to be. And then I became a patient because my situation demanded that I be. I even went to school for that. Like, I was professionally working, and then I got sick. And it became my number one identity, was getting better, because I felt horrible all the time. And it wasn't until the storm had passed and I had regulated my nervous system that I then felt like the intense grief of all of the loss that I had in my life, all of the years lost. I almost looked at it as like, I had always seen my life as before sick, and then I'll get right back to it as soon as this is over. But a decade had passed and nothing was where I left it. And I wasn't the same in good ways and in bad ways or hard ways. And it's just impossible to have this societal expectation be, well, you're well. So you're fine now. It's impossible to not sit with yourself and allow yourself to feel the pain of the life that you thought that you would live, the dreams that you had, and the dreams of who you thought you'd become. But something I want to share is that I always saw my life in two parts. Like I saw my life before I got sick and after I got sick, and it almost felt psychically like there was this, you know, in action hero movies when you jump from one side of the land to the other and there's this big hole in between. When I look back at those years, while I was so plugged in and I was living, because I was running so much, I literally am like, I don't even know how all that time passed. And that's really painful but it's essential to full healing that you allow yourself to process the pain of the experience of getting sick, of being totally invalidated, of being told you look fine when you're screaming from the rooftops that you're not fine. And we live in a culture that doesn't prize recovery, or what I ended up on was convalescence, but it's not just for grandmas. It's like the only word that fits. I'm going to make it cool. And that doesn't mean that you can't live your life. Like kids are going to kid, bills are going to bill. You got to live. But it's essential to be taking time and scheduling time for you to be with your inner landscape and your feelings and allow yourself the process of healing emotionally, because it's excruciating. And if you don't work on that part of it, you will always be running from a ghost. It will always be there.
So is this emotional convalescence?
Yes. Recovery. But it's not recovery, because that feels like that's like AA, right? And then it's not like rest and restoration, because that doesn't fit either. So I ended up, because we can't, like, we're not in a Victorian era where we can just go lie on the couch for a month until we're better, or the chaise lounge.
So if you were an influencer, maybe in addition to medical trauma brain, you could also talk about emotional convalescence.
Oh, I'm making it cool again.
Right.
I want to ask a question because
I'm determined it's not just for grandmas.
we've had this conversation about brain retraining and brain rewiring with a lot of different doctors and patients. And we've had different views about when the timing is right to do it. In your experience, you had to get through the physical and get through the actual infections, and then you had to address the brain retraining. Now, I wonder, what are your views towards integrating that earlier on? Because some people have tried it, and they said it did not work because they had to get rid of the microbes first, or the pathogens, and then it would be beneficial. Others argue differently, that it's an integral piece of the earlier stages once you get a diagnosis to treat, and there's a lot of differences there. So I'm curious where your head is at with that approach.
I have a very strong opinion,
Please
which
share
is
it.
part of why I wrote this book was because I hope that the narrative around health and healing changes. Because if a doctor had ever said to me, this is going to be traumatic, you should be helping yourselves in these ways, even if it didn't get me through all the way, I would have been all over it. But I didn't think of them as affecting each other. I didn't realize the trauma that I was going through because I was so in it physically. And I hope that the narrative around this landscape changes in the medical system, where you have to be addressing all at the same time. Like they're not separate. And I really hope, in being so vulnerable in this book, that I'm urging people to not do as I did, but pay attention to this earlier, so that even if there's maintenance or the heavy lifting at the end, you're already aware of what's happening to you. I had no idea that any of this was coming.
Yeah.
And it rocked me.
And in fact, we've had people tell us, Amy, that when they're addressing the brain retraining earlier on, they receive treatment better. Their herxings are not as strong. And people who
That's
are more
interesting.
sensitive, right? So for example, people that can't take more than a drop of cryptolepis, and they address their nervous system. Now they can take two dropperfuls because
not
their
for
nervous
me,
system is
but
regulated.
okay.
So we again, we've heard varying things, which is why I wanted to get your opinion. People have felt strongly on both ends. You got to wait until the end, or nope, you should do it in the beginning. But those who feel that it's beneficial in the beginning have said it's made their experiences easier once they've addressed both at the same time.
Why not try? I
Right.
mean, why wait? You're already losing so much of your life. Like, if you have to do more work at the end, okay. But if you're at least aware that this is something that could happen to you, and I'm arguing happens to all patients who have been through years and years and years of struggle with invisible illness, why not start now? That's a way to have agency, to say, hey, I'm going to really work on my mind-body during this treatment.
Yeah. Can I push her with one thing, Rich? I want to, because this is sort of off to the side, and I'm going to throw an oddball at you.
Every time you say that.
So we've been hearing a lot about SAT therapy for alpha-gal, S-A-A-T. Have you heard about that?
No.
Solomon, the guy's name, something, allergy therapy, S-A, allergy therapy. And what it essentially is they put these acupuncture needles in your ear, and they're pressure points. They do it for about 2 weeks in a cycle, and it stimulates the nervous system to change. So the pressure points almost reset your nervous system. And the science is showing that it actually helps your nervous system talk to the immune system and say, don't overreact to the alpha-gal protein. And many people are telling us that when they do the SAT therapy, their alpha-gal's gone within either 1 session to 3 sessions. We're talking 2 to 6 weeks. Others have said, not so much, but a large percentage of the people we're talking to are saying it's helpful. Now, that to me is a nervous system regulation technique. So do you think this is integrated to what you're discussing? And do you think this is an example of the overlap between the physical healing and the physical response of the immune system, right? Versus also the brain retraining as well, because everything is connected, the brain, the immune system, and the nervous system. So now we're introducing the immune component and the immune overreactivity to things like alpha-gal.
It sounds really interesting. I'd never heard of it before, so I don't know.
But it does make a lot of sense
Yeah.
based on your experience,
Yeah.
right? And because part of what I wanted to stress test with you is that
test.
yes,
That means debate with you, in case you were wondering.
is this spirit.
I really love a gold star, and when you say that, it makes me nervous.
So well, you've got nothing but gold stars from me every time we talk there. So there are a number of different things that are going to cause your brain to be rewired in a way that's not going to serve you, right? Some of it may be inflammation. Some of it may be the bugs in the brain. Some of it could be the traumatic experiences of the way that you're interacting with doctors, or the way your identity is changing, or the way you're being socially isolated. There are a gazillion different things that are going to cause your brain to be rewired, and they're going to be, and it's going to wire differently based on the type of trauma, whether it's microbial trauma or inflammatory trauma or social trauma. And what I want to call to everyone's attention is that we want everyone to understand that you are a spiritual being, you are an emotional being, you are a physical being. That your brain is going to be in control of everything that will happen to you from the day that you're born until the day that you die, and you must learn about your brain. And you are going to need to likely go through a process of physical healing, emotional healing, and spiritual healing, but the path is going to be different for every single person, right? Because if there may be a person that has bugs in their brain that's causing the rewiring, and they may not be the kind of person that can start to do the neural retraining early on because they have to kill the bugs. Or they may be somebody who has inflammation in their brain, and because they have inflammatory responses in their brain, maybe they're not the person that has to start early on with the neural retraining because they have to reduce the inflammatory conditions, or maybe so there is not going to be a one size fit all. What I'm hoping everybody walks away from this podcast with is that they need to be aware that they have to retrain all 3 elements, that they have to heal in all 3 elements, and that they can be gentle enough to know that maybe they start something today and do something else tomorrow, or and use the model to use it where you healed physically and then emotionally and then you were already spiritually healthy, or some other combination.
Mm-hmm. I think it's totally up to the individual. However, the fact that it's missing from the conversation is detrimental.
For sure.
And that should be the patient's choice. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but we should be told that up front. And so many of the interactions that I had with doctors had made it worse and worse and worse. And that's one of the experiences that's been so painful, is also that, I feel like we have a loneliness epidemic in our country, and I can't think of anything more lonely than living with invisible illness like Lyme disease, because it's not just with doctors, it's with loved ones, it's with friends, there's this tendency to want to put on a mask because it feels easier than to have to handle everybody else's reaction to you on top of everything else that you're going through. And one of the things that Dr. Mate said to me was that when we're young, we have attachment and we have authenticity. And oftentimes, we'll always choose attachment because we're little and we need whoever is taking care of us to take care of us so that we're safe. But the same thing repeats with doctors. And if you're used to not choosing your authenticity, then you're choosing attachment even though it may be bad behavior. And for me, I was doing that over and over and over, and I didn't even realize because I just needed them to get better. I was like, just tell me what to do. I'll do anything. I literally will do anything to get better. But what I also really think is so important for patients in terms of agency is that you don't have to stay with a doctor because they're the best. That doesn't mean they're the best for you. You would never marry the first person that you ever dated. I hope not. And it's kind of like you have to get really in tune with what do I need from a doctor or a healer, or what will make me feel safe. And for me, that was the doctor that I found. But it took me a really long time.
But anyway, again, let's stress test that as well, because almost everyone that we've worked with who has become as healthy as you have, or as healthy as Matt has become, has worked with many different doctors. And I think the sense in the community is that that's a bad thing, that you should be able to find the doctor that's going to make you better. And my argument is that every doctor, no matter how good he or she or they are, is ultimately going to have their limitations. And we should be bouncing from doctor to doctor, because they're going to get to the point where they can only give you so much help, and then it's time for you to move to someone else who has another skill set, who has the capacity to help you take the next step. So I think we should be moving on from doctor to doctor, and not find that to be problematic.
I'm just going to throw this in there because so many patients have said to me over the years that I've worked with privately that they've helped them to a certain extent and they feel bad leaving.
For sure.
Like you're literally wasting your life.
But if the mindset that we reset with this podcast and other conversations we have, which is your expectation should be that you will leave your doctor, that you will only be with a doctor for a limited period of time, and just because they helped you to get to a certain level of relief, that doesn't mean that you're not supposed to leave them. And we have that all throughout our lives. I mean, recently, I've shared with folks that we left the accounting firm that my firm was working with. My wife had a very good relationship with the accountant that we were working with, but it was time for us to move on. Our business grew to a place where we needed another level of expertise, and they couldn't provide it to us. Now, we were sad about that, and this wasn't even somebody who helped us medically. It was just somebody who we worked with professionally. So it's, when we do connect with someone socially, it does make it difficult for us to move on. But these professional relationships are professional relationships, and everyone's going to have their limitations about what they're going to be able to contribute to you. And when they get to the point where they've maximized the contribution, they should certainly be encouraging you to move on. But but of course they're incentivized not to do that. But so your mindset has to be, I'm going to work with this doctor for a limited period of time, and then I'm going to move on.
I don't know if I totally agree with that, but
Okay.
what I do think is that a doctor who says the best kind of doctor is one that knows their limits.
Okay.
And if you have a physician that will say to you, this is out of my league, I'd recommend that you either go somewhere else, or like I had a doctor in the very, very beginning, and he's wonderful. And I was just above what he could do. And he said to me, I've tried everything I can, and I'm so sorry, but I think you should go find X doctor if you can. And years later, I wrote Kicking Sick, and I asked him for an endorsement. And he said, I thought I'd never hear from you again. I feel like I failed you. And I said, you set me free. You set me free.
You did what you could, and then set you free.
But that's what I'm saying is it's not just that you shouldn't maybe be with someone. You should if they're great and they understand you and you feel safe with them. But you should move on if you're getting red flags. There are a lot of red flags.
Or not necessarily red flags that they've done something wrong, but that they've achieved as much as they can achieve with you. It doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with them. It's just they've done as much as they can do. And our mindset should be, with any professional we work with, that we move on. And I don't know why doctors struggle with that. I think some of that is is that riding in on the white horse complex. But I can tell you, at least in my profession, where we're different kind of doctors, right? I have clients who I recommend work with different lawyers all the time. Why? Because I have my limited scope of expertise. And when it comes to, for example, a labor issue, I'm not a labor lawyer. I recommend they work with a particular labor lawyer. When it comes on to a personal injury case, I don't do personal injury work. At least in my profession, we constantly refer people to work with other professionals, and we continue to work with them within the context of the work our channel of expertise. Well, doctors need to do the same thing, especially Western-trained doctors who have a very limited scope of practice. They need to be moving people on. They need to be encouraging you to do this. And one of the things, again, I really loved about your book is you're opening up the conversation, not just being critical of the Western medicine mindset where we have all these subspecialties and subspecialties and subspecialties, right? Where they're looking through a very limited prism. But the other problem they have is they don't respect the mind and the medical professionals who are not working on the body but who are working on the mind, and that's why people in so many cases are sicker so much longer than they need to be, because the benefit of having the neural retraining will enhance the body's capacity to heal, and the path to healing will be shorter.
Yeah. Do you feel like you should always be ready to leave somebody?
So I think there's multiple, from my standpoint, there's multiple answers to that, right? The first part is I've had doctors that I've seen that were totally dismissive and I should have left immediately and I didn't, right? Yeah. So if somebody doesn't believe you, I don't think you should even stay with them. I think you should just walk out the door and say thank you, but no thank you, right? So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is I've had doctors whom I adore who have seen me and politely, as Rich noted, referred me out and said, look, you're having issues in my area of expertise. I've tried a lot with you. We have had limited success. I think there's other areas you need to go. And so a neurologist referred me to a rheumatologist because of these inflammatory markers and chronic pain. I was having neurological issues, but he's like, look, I think there's more here, and I think that you need to go, and at first I resisted, but I should have, right? I should have went on my own, and then he pushed me, and I still kind of resisted, and I did. And that helped me to get bigger picture information from a lab standpoint, from a blood standpoint, from a specialist standpoint, to then make an informed decision and use my intuition, what I'm feeling, with the data I have and the various opinions to really, fast forward in my healing journey. So, in short, yes, but I do still see those doctors periodically, just to once a year check in and say, how's it going? And I want to keep them in my toolbox, if that makes sense.
Too.
So I don't actively treat with them, but I see them just to keep them in my toolbox in case I need them again.
Yeah.
So I have bounced around, but that's my approach, Amy, when it comes to it. So
Me too.
So you asked Matt, so now why don't you tell me why you think I'm wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I don't think if you're going to really commit to working with someone, you need to be fully in, not with the thought that I'm going to leave them.
No, I agree. I think you should be all in. Look, in order to be coached, let's take it out of the context of working with a doctor, and let's talk about a coach, which is a place where you have more expertise, and certainly anybody in this conversation, right? So I believe that a good coach ultimately teaches you to coach yourself. Right? I believe a good coach understands that at some point the coach has coached you to the point where you are as good as you can be with the coaching that I can give you, and it's time for you to either accept the agency of coaching yourself or move on to another professional. Right? That's what I would think. And why would it be different with doctors? Because in order for me to be coached by Amy, I have to be all in. I have to be fully committed. I have to be coachable. Yeah. But at some point, I'm either going to progress beyond where Amy can help me, or we're speaking a different language, and I'm not benefiting from it, and there needs to be another person. So why would it be different in the coaching arena than it would be in a doctor? And isn't really a doctor just a medical coach?
I didn't hear it that way. I heard you saying you have to always be have an end date in mind, and I think that naturally comes if you listen to yourself. Okay. So that's all I was saying.
Okay.
I agree with that, actually, Amy. So I'm with you on this one, as usual.
Mm. All right.
Of course.
So I would keep you here for many, many hours, Amy, because I'm always fascinated by our conversation. But I do want to talk about one more topic, and then I promise you I'll let you go.
I'm happy.
And so let's talk about identity. I really like the way you discuss identity in the book. And I want to sort of bring in the mask piece of this conversation and bring that to the identity piece. So talk about how your identity changed and why you think your identity changed during the course of this Lyme disease journey.
I mean, it changed in every orifice of me, because I went from I was such a carefree, sprightly little girl, and I had such a clear idea of who I was going to be in the world. And then the rug was ripped out from under me. with my health. And it didn't just last a few months. It lasted years and years and years. And it became something that for the beginning part of my journey was really invalidated. And that does something to you when you're not believed by people because they say, well, you look okay. That's why I called it, but you look fine. Right. I had like a whole document about all the invalidating statements that people say, but it makes you start to question yourself when people don't believe you. And who is it invisible to? Like if you have eyes and you're aware of somebody's energy field or that they wouldn't be acting like that if they were fine. So for me, all of that compounded and it made me, one, become a professional patient. Like I literally was a patient for so many years before I had a health coaching degree to supplement my acting career, and then it became what it is now. But everything with my health came first. So it defined who I was, and it changed my relationship with myself. And when the storm was over, it became really hard to grapple with all of the changes that I'd been through and what I had lost and who I was now. And also at the same time, like as many hardships as there's been through this, like there's been so many blessings that I wouldn't change for anything. And it changed my perspective on the other end of like, I used to be like, why is this happening to me? Why do I have to go through this? I feel horrible all the time. Nobody is listening. And then on the other end, it's like I would never have found a deep spirituality inside myself. I would never have had the beauty and the richness of seeing life like almost through a different lens completely, where I am so grateful for everything that I have and everybody that I can connect with and the things that I can do that make my body feel good that I could have never even dreamed of doing. I'm so grateful. And it's brought in practices into my life that like where I'm from, like I would have never learned them. Never. So even though the struggle was so intense and so painful, it took me to like the other side of the rainbow because it
was the path to growth.
It enriched everything in my life, everything. Even from how I see someone on the street and connect with them. I'm just present in a way that I would have never been. And I feel like I've evolved so deeply because I allowed myself to.
Because stress does trigger growth. And the more stress you're under, the more you grow. The more you learn about who you are and who God created you to be and who God created you to serve.
Only if you're willing to look to it, you know?
Well, and you do
it's hard to look into that. Don't you think?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can either accept it as a challenge that will change you and that you'll grow from, or you can be defined by it.
And again, I haven't been on the journey the way the two of you have, so I certainly don't want this to sound judgy in any way, but I do think when you're in the throes of it, you have one of two things. You can ask yourself one of two questions. Question one can be, why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
And that is a question. Or what am I supposed to learn from this, right? So you can either have, and go back to the agency conversation, you can take agency over the experience, and you can go through what is defined as post-traumatic growth, where you see this as working for you, you see this as stress that was necessary for you to define who you are and who you're supposed to serve and have the richness that you have. Or you can get wrapped up in it and just stay sick and stay in the moment of the illness and just constantly ask, why is it happening to me?
And nothing feels worse than that. Like the choice to stay in that is so painful. But it's also incredible because I always thought, and I was so clear that I was going to be an actor, like never any doubt. In my mind, ask my mom, since like I was this tall. But I became a writer, and I can see now that through all of the struggle, I was doing that because I was so sad and so like I was struggling so much to have a creative outlet because I was raised with my mom who's an artist and I was always expressing myself. I didn't have a way to do that while I was struggling, and so I started writing. And if I didn't start writing, I would never have connected with the thousands of people who reached out to me after kicking sick. I would have never had the idea for this. My publisher would have never said this is groundbreaking and want to buy it. And if you just like surrender to the journey, it can take you to really beautiful places, even though it's horrible sometimes.
Well, it's certainly horrible when we don't get what it is we think we want, but maybe what an actor is somebody who is in tune with their emotions. They move other people. I mean, we go to movies because they move us, right? They move us emotionally, and that's what actors do. And isn't that what you're doing now? Isn't that what you're doing in the book, that you are identifying how to be a healthy emotional being and how you can move other people in the way that you do? So aren't you really just an actor?
My good friend said that the other day to me, I went to college with him, but he said it's basically like the ultimate form of acting. I didn't really see it that way. I just saw it as my spirit needed to have an outlet, and so I started writing. But now I'm not going back there.
Right.
I'm only going to write another one. So
you're using the same skills for a different purpose.
yeah,
So you are an actor.
I'm an actor.
So, Amy, this podcast is launching the week your book is launching. So we're going to put the link to your book in the show notes. We're going to encourage everybody listening and watching on YouTube to go buy the book and learn from you. And now you just got me excited because you said until the next one, which means the next one is coming, which means we're going to have you back here. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to be promoting that book as well. Because to Rich's point, you are moving people. You are helping people get through this stuck state, right? And your book, it's correct me if I'm wrong, trapped in the hell between sick and well, and how to break free, right? We're stuck in that middle state, and you're helping people break through that and get to ultimate healing. So this is going to touch millions of people, and we're so happy to have you as part of our community, and so happy to have met you and consider you a friend.
Thank you so much.
We can't thank you enough for joining our Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Thank you so much. You too.